Where I'm coming from with all of this is that I was not sexually abused at length when I was a child. It only happened to me once. And it wasn't, I would say it was not very, it wasn't very harsh. It wasn't grape. It wasn't that. And it happened at a children's birthday party. I think it was my best friend at the time's 9th birthday party, and they were having a sleepover. And basically at night time, the father went around to the various places in the house that the children were sleeping, the friends were sleeping, and I think he sort of felt up, probably about 4 of us. At the time, I didn't really know what was going on when it was happening. I was just like, why is his hand going there? That's where the we comes out. In my child brain, that is how I rationalized. I was like, that's why I was confused, because I was like, that's where the P or the we comes out. Why would you put your hand down there? Because that's gross. Why would you do something like that? Ew. And this was happening while I was sort of half asleep. And I think he said something like, ooh, what do we have down here? And then I was just sort of like, no, I want to sleep. I want to go to sleep. And eventually he left. And yeah, apparently it happened to like at least 3 other kids. Yeah. My best friend at the time, let's call her Melody Sanderson. We were friends for about 2 years before their family left. And the reason was because the father was tried in court for child molestation. One of the other kids, not me, had brought this to her parents' attention. The police had got involved, and lawyers came around to all the different houses to check with each kid, had it happened. They corroborated stories, they checked with the actual description of the environment. Everything checked out, the kids weren't lying. Yeah, and he was tried and the family moved away. My friend Melody was a super nice kid. Really, really sweet, really, really kind. Her family were religious, Christian religious. The dad seemed like a confident man. The mother was very, I would say, weak-willed. She always looked like a wilting violet, like she looked like her spirit had been broken. She was very nice, Denise was, but she didn't look like she had a lot of fight in her. The one time I was over at their house, this was on a different occasion before that. Me and Melody had been playing, and my mom was still to come in a bit, like 20 minutes or half an hour, and it was near dinner time. And I could hear water going in the bathroom, and I asked Melody, oh, there's somebody showering, and she goes, yeah, no, my sister's in there. And my dad's there to help her. My sister's in there, my dad's there to help. Keep in mind, her sister at that time was older than her. Her sister was 14 years old. A self-conscious 14-year-old going through adolescence, going through puberty, potentially starting her period. And her dad is inside there, making sure, taking care of her or something, I don't know. That's how Melody worded it. At the time I was really puzzled. I was probably about 8 going on 9, and I really didn't understand why her dad would be in there with her older sister. Like, parents normally go in the bathroom while their children are bathing or bathing when the child is a toddler or a baby. You don't need to watch a 14-year-old girl while she's showering or bathing. And then if she does need some kind of help, it's usually from the mum. And this wasn't the case. This was from the father. And according to Melody, this was a common occurrence. Her father would just go in to help her bathing, help her bathing, help her shower. And the way she said it was like a perfectly normal thing for them to be doing. In most other families that I'm aware of, that would be extremely weird and very suspect. And the father would be seen of as a perv or a pervert. Very sus, very suspicious. When we were a bit younger, me and Melody would play games with Barbies. Now, Melody never specifically said that her dad did anything to her. She never actually said that. But the Barbie and Ken games were very, very interesting. I don't know if you're aware, but psychologists frequently in their offices, they'll have toys for children to play with, because children frequently find it very difficult to explain what's going on with them, but they can play a game and show what's been going on with them anyway. This wasn't in that circumstance. We were just playing with Barbies and Kens. And the normal flow of the game would be Barbie or her sister or Ken, and they're going out somewhere, they're going to have dinner, they're going somewhere, or maybe it's about clothes. I'm going to wear this now because we're going to go and do this kind of thing. Melody, in one of her games, had Ken ostensibly going down on Barbie. Melody at the time was about 8 years old. Ken was going down on Barbie. That's the language I know to use now. But back then, I wouldn't know how. I was like, why? I think I even asked him, like, why is he down there? Because, again, in my mind, like, that's where the wee comes out, right? That's where the urine comes out. That's gross. That's for the toilet area, right? That's my child brain. And she was like sort of doing it in like a he, like naughty kind of way. And she didn't say don't tell anybody, but she was just like he's doing this, he. It was very much like play, game. And I was just sitting there like in my very confused state going, I don't understand how that would be fun in any way. Like, I don't get it. And another thing about poor Melody. So, like you hear the lead up to the events, and then her dad gets tried in court and found guilty on multiple counts of child molestation, basically sexual molestation. And what I remember is he didn't go to jail or anything. He didn't go to jail. He didn't do any jail time. He was just relocated. They relocated. They left and they went somewhere. But there was a period of time when all of this was still in process and the verdict hadn't come down and the Sandersons hadn't left yet. And I mentioned before that Melody was one of my good friends. She was actually one of my best friends. I'd always felt, even before I knew about this, that there was something about her that, even as a little kid, I felt needed protecting. She needed backup. She needed someone who had her back, legitimately. And I felt the same way about Sally as well. I had that same feeling about both the girls. And the best way I can describe the feeling is compromised. They felt compromised. Like they looked fine on the surface, but there was something about them that felt vulnerable, or like there was a vulnerability to them, like they'd taken a knock somehow. Compromised is the best way that I can describe it. And even to this day, every now and then I'll pick up on it, sometimes with a kid. And there's almost never any way to be sure, because you can't just go to a kid and go, hey, how's your dad treating you at home? Or, hey, do you have a funny uncle? Or, you got to be so careful how you go about these things. There's the whole safeguarding culture in a lot of schools where teachers have to tiptoe very carefully around these areas. Also, you don't want to piss off any well-to-do, high tuition paying parents now, do you? That seems to be more the scope of things in some places. Anyway, the thing with Melody was, okay, so her dad had been tried and found guilty, but she's still attending school, right? She's still attending school with the rest of us, with everybody around her judging her, and I could see it definitely affected her. Before, she was very happy-go-lucky. She was very bright and sparkly and, she could do no wrong kind of thing. And then after her dad was tried, it's almost like she tried to go into hiding a bit. Like she was still doing things. She'd still pitch up at school and do the whole thing. But she was very, very, very aware of people and their reactions to her. A lot of our class didn't treat her very badly. But me and her would sometimes go for walks around the school. And I remember one time we were walking towards where, is it standard 4s or standard 5? I can't quite remember. It's maybe standard 4s. So these kids would have been maybe 14, 15. I can't quite remember. And we were walking towards these classrooms. And I remember there were some kids out the door. There were boys and girls outside the door, and Melody turned to me and said, Jen, let's not go down there. And I'm like, oh, what's the problem? She goes, no, those kids don't like us anymore. They don't like me, like my sisters in their class. And you remember, she had an older sister who was that age, and that was their classmate. And keep in mind, that girl also had to go to school, and apparently she also had classmates in that class that her dad had accessed. Imagine that. Imagine life for those two girls. Having to go to school and be in class with people that have already decided that you are dirt and your whole family is dirt. And you haven't even done anything wrong. Both Melody and her sister had never done anything wrong. It was just their dad. But everybody was judging them for it on behalf of their dad. Sins of the father, so to speak. Yeah, so that was Melody Sanderson. Okay. So their family moved away. The very next year, 2 other girls' families moved into our town. One of the families had a girl in it. I'm going to call her Sally Friedman. Sally Friedman was in our class. She was a really sweet girl. She was really nice. Also, the family was looked very conservative. They were churchgoers. They looked very not well-to-do, but they were very very, very middle class, very, they kind of kept to themselves a lot. And the parents, to me, always looked a little sort of defensive, like on the defensive. A little bit like, again, like a wilting violet kind of look about them. About like maybe 12 at the time. Maybe 12 at the time. And, well, Sally and them had been with us about a couple of years. And about the age of 12, almost dead on, stories started to circulate of what Sally was getting up to with some of the boys in our class, and also older boys, and boys from outside of our school. And she didn't seem so much to kind of stick with one in particular, but she was sort of like going from one to the other initially. After a while she settled down and then she'd date somebody consistently, but I'm going to say that Sally, the stories that were true, I actually corroborated with Sally later that they were actually true. The stories that were going around about Sally were so wild for our town at the time. She was doing things that the average 16-year-old or 17-year-old, or not even that age in our town, like probably, I'm going to say the average 20-year-old, a 22, 23-year-old. Let's put it at the average 22, 23-year-old in today's environment would feel okay doing, like going down on people and like the full toot. Sally was doing this on the regular with various different people around town, and she was 12. And from watching her during the day, I was fully of the mind that she genuinely thought she wasn't doing anything wrong, and it wasn't weird for her. Like there was no skin off her back about it. Like she was totally fine with it. Like there was no guilt, there was no like shame about it, just like, oh, this, okay, you know, whatever kind of thing. At 12 years old, she had become very comfortable with activities that only a 20 to 23-year-old might be okay with, or might be used to, let's just say. She was she was doing this at a scale that showed she was very, very used to it. Very, very used to it at the age of 12. Which begs the question, when was she initiated into it? The average 12-year-old, the average self-conscious, shy, doesn't say boo to a goose, 12-year-old, with no interference in their life, or no otherwise sexual interference from their family from young, is never in a million years going to be that brazen about doing things like that with people around town, with boys in the class, with boys in school, people way older than her. No way. And I know this because I was one, and everyone else around me was not doing that. She was a different breed. I don't mean like a different species. I mean like something else had been happening with her. And for her to be that seasoned and that brazen about it at the age of 12 means that there had to be some kind of lead up. That doesn't come from nowhere. That doesn't just, now she's class bicycle kind of thing. No, there was a lead up. And another question that begs to be asked is, who was leading her into it? For a kid to be that familiar with things, that worldly about things at 12 years old, barely starting puberty, barely, like she probably even hadn't had her first period. She was that brazen about it. I think she was probably in the same kind of family that Melody had been. And Melody's family had left, and her family had arrived. Which has one thinking, was it on purpose? I don't know, I'll never know. But Sally's behavior was particular to her. No other girl in our classes exhibited the same behavior as her. Nobody did. But she thought that what she was doing was perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable. The thing to note, though, was the marked effect that it had on the surrounding young male population. The boys in my class, the boys in other classes, she got such a reputation. But it also began to change the way my boy classmates viewed girls and women. It began to change the way they viewed females. Initially, we were friends, playmates, partners, desk mates, someone you'd tease about stuff, someone whose hair you'd pull, someone you'd climb trees with. But then, with Sally's arrival and her activities, there was now this new focus on girls are also this other thing we can do things with. And that began to change the way they saw us. I'm not going to say there was a division, but there was definitely like another view that came into their head about women and females, and I could feel it with my friends. I used to be very, very close with some of my guy friends, and then something happened, and it was almost like they were distancing themselves, looking at you in a different way, looking at everybody else in a different way. I was sorry for my loss at the time. I genuinely mean that. I feel like I lost some very deep parts of good friends there. They stopped seeing us as eye-to-eye human and started seeing us as facility for pleasure or something like that. Interesting, right? I will add that at the time that I was 12 years old, this was around 1991, 1992. And at that time we did not have the internet. The internet was still to come for quite a few years. So nobody had access to porn websites. People did not have easy access to porn per se. And our government was very, very conservative, and our background and our immediate environment was extremely conservative Christian. So keeping all this in mind, it was not the same environment as it is today, where like a 12-year-old could access a porn website if they knew how to. If they knew the URL, they could. But at that time, no way. It was quite alien at that time. So this is why it stood out in these things about my two friends stood out in my mind. On Sally's side, how it initially started in my memory was, I think we were on like a standard 3, I think we were like about 12 at the time, a standard 3 class trip, and we were going somewhere. Our school bus had stopped at like a picnic site. We were coming home and we'd stopped at a picnic site. And at the time, I had a really good guy child friend, like childhood friend, who I'd been friends with for quite a few years before. At least 4 years, 3-4 years before that. And let's call him Clifford. And he was somewhere around. I wasn't hanging out with him at the time. But if anyone had to ask either one of us who our closest friend was, we'd probably say each other, or maybe another person, but we would have both been in our handful of closest friends. And we'd been hanging out a lot. And I remember that Sally came up to me at one point and she was like, "So Jen, where's Clifford?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know what he's doing. He's doing his own thing. I don't know." And then she was like, "So are you guys like boyfriend and girlfriend or something?" And I was like, "No, he's my friend. He's just my friend. And that's the way it is, yeah." And then she was like, "Oh, okay. Well, do you think you could put in a good word for me sometime?" And I'm like, "Oh, you want me to say something to Clifford about you? Oh, okay, I could do that, because, I had nothing against her, and, okay, fine, sure." I think I did say something to Clifford at some point, but he was sort of like non-receptive, because I don't know, being 12 or 13 at the time, boys are like, "What?" They're like unaware of things at that stage. Anyway, but she was very, like, she was young, like she was my age, and she was very like with it, and she was making inroads, and she was finding out like who's doing what, and whose toes would I be stepping on, kind of thing. So that was my deal with her. But after that, we were always friends. I never had anything against Sally, and I could, again, like I mentioned before, I could also feel there was something about her. I just refused to judge her. I refused to pass judgment on her, because I felt that there's other things happening. It's not just her. She could be the victim. She could be the one who's being hurt in certain areas. I don't know. I could be very wrong about Sally. Anyway, maybe she's an excellent actress. But like, aside from me, like, as the rumors started to spread about what she was up to and what she was, doing at certain people's places with various boys in our school, older than us. Sometimes there's a guy from outside of school, like, it was pretty, like, for us at that time, it's pretty wild story going around, pretty, like, lots of tea kind of thing. And then I remember I always had like a couple of girlfriends maximum, or one best friend. I didn't have a big group or clique of girlfriends, but I was aware of another clique. I was friends with them, but I wasn't deeply friends with them, but like, we got along. They were fun. And there were a bunch of girls in that group who took Sally in as their friend initially, and they had the equivalent of like boyfriends in our class. And I remember at some point, Sally lost the favor of the girls in that group. They lost respect for her. They didn't like her, because something seemed to be going on with the boys that they'd been dating and Sally. There was some involvement there. I don't exactly know what happened, but one of them, let's just say her name was Christine, was very, very, very angry with Sally for quite a long time. And I like both girls. I didn't know the deeper involvement, but and Sally's demeanor, her demeanor was like she didn't understand what the big deal was. Like she didn't get like, what was everybody so very angry about? Like, do we own each other or something? Kind of like that. Her countenance, like the way she was after that, was almost like so what? Like, what did I do so wrong? It was kind of like that. She did not look guilty. She did not look like self-effacing. She did not look at all like chastened. She was sort of like, what? I don't understand. What? You know, like, well, get off my back kind of thing. And a very self-conscious, like, shy teenage girl would not have that reaction if she was not very used to that kind of behavior and actually thought it might be normal. I actually do have quite a nice memory with and of Sally. At one point, we'd all gone to a birthday party, and her clique of cool girls, the clique that she was in before they got angry with her, was a bunch of really, really cool girls. Her initial friend group that she'd come into and they'd taken her in, they were like the cool girls, established cool girls, right? But I was not in that clique. I had a best friend at the time, and we were really close, and we felt no need to kind of enter a clique at all. We were fine just on our own twosome. And at the time, my best friend was not at this birthday party, so I was hanging out with the cool girl clique and, just, making jokes and chatting and everything. I think at the time, I was not seen as cool. I was seen more of as a nerd or a grafter or a swat. Like, can you tell? I at the time I did not have glasses, but I did well in school, and I was a good kid, and I didn't have boyfriends in the sense. And after getting along with these girls for the day, I went off to go do something, and then Sally came over to me, and she was like, Jen, you're really cool. You wanna join our group? Do you wanna come in and be, another one? Basically, a formal invitation to the cool girl group. And I did consider it, but I was kind of like, at the time, I was very loyal to my best friend. I still am very loyal to my best friend at the time, and I ostensibly turned her down very gently. I turned Sally down gently. So like, no, me and Annabelle are good. We're okay. I wouldn't wanna leave her, unless maybe she came with me, And then Sally was like, oh, okay, all right, nice hanging out with you today. And then that was it. So years later, when me and Sally were in college, we actually hung out quite a lot. We'd even go clubbing together. Sally had a Ford Focus and a driving license, so she was awesome to hang out with. She was a lot of fun, and she was awesome to hang out with when we went clubbing. I remember she was able to drive under the influence very skillfully. Like she was rock solid on the road. I do remember that about her. I would say I trust that girl with my life on the road. Probably, if I think about my whole life and the experiences with people driving, she would be one of the people that I trust the most in a car. driving, like she being the driver, even a little bit of this, even that. Beating a lot of other drivers, especially men drivers, because men drive with their egos frequently, right? Yeah. I did eventually in college, when we were staying at the same dormitory residence, I did ask her, like, so back in school, like, you know, like you faced a lot of like comeback, you know, after like the stuff that you were busy with, you know, with the guys and everything, like why did you do it? And she had an answer for me. She basically said, I just didn't have much self-respect at the time. I didn't have enough self-respect. That's the answer she gave me. But how does a 12-year-old get to feeling that brazen about that kind of thing at that age? Don't know. And so it was pretty much the end of the innocence of that era in my school anyway, at that time. I'm not sure if there were other kids that came afterwards that had a similar background. There probably were, who knows. But in my area, we had schools in different districts, and ours was the most coastal one, like closest to the beach, closest to the sea. And our particular district seemed to have these girls. And it also seemed like in my whole had these girls, and this was different to the other districts around us. And keep in mind, in South Africa at the time, in that area, there were far more Afrikaans speaking white people families. There were fewer English speaking families, but this kind of thing you almost never heard of coming from Afrikaans families. Now, if you don't know Afrikaans, the Afrikaners are basically the descendants of the Dutch settlers from 200, 300 years ago. And they've always lived on, since that time they've lived on South African land, and they're especially good at farming. They are amazing at farming. They're very solid, practical people. They take things seriously. They're usually quite religious and quite strict in their upbringings. And in my whole life, I've known many families and friends of both English speakers and Afrikaans speakers. I have never come across a child from an Afrikaans family that's had this influence. It's almost always been from English-speaking sectors. I don't know what holding that has on this, but it's pointing to me that these things come from certain directions. And so, yeah, definitely the end of this age of innocence for us. I'm not going to pinpoint Sally specifically as responsible for this. I mean, it would have inevitably happened anyway. People discovering sex, older brothers, older sisters talking about things, picking up a magazine of the Corn Persuasion, finding a whole cabinet of your dad's tapes or something, I don't know, and so on and so forth, right? She was not fully responsible for this end of innocence, but her actions accelerated it. I will say that safely. At this stage of development in my classmates and my school's perspective on things, it was accelerated. This awareness of, oh, there's other things. There's of the sordid kind. Let's just say that, safely sordid kind. It was accelerated. So she was not specifically responsible for all of it, but it sure helped. Her actions sure helped. I do remember there was another girl younger than us by a couple of years who came in after Sally did, and this girl also had a similar thing going. I also had the same feeling about her, that compromised feeling. And a good friend of mine had a birthday party one time. I think we were close to 16 or 17, something like that. And it was my friend's 16th birthday party. And it was a house party, basically. It was a typical, like, things go wild kind of house party. And this one girl at the party, at a certain point, she had boys lining up down a corridor going into a bathroom where she was giving people head. And she was about 12, 13, 14, something like that. Like so young. Again, so young. And so worldly, so used to, so comfortable with this kind of thing. And also at the time, it was like she didn't consider the consequences of it. There was nothing like this about her before, and then all of a sudden there was this enormous piece of tea, this enormous amount of gossip about her the following week, and her name just went down the drain. It was in the mud. She was known as head girl, not head girl of the school, but head girl, because she did it to so many people in one night. And her name was trashed. People looked at her, in a totally different way now. She lost all respect. I'd say she probably battled with friends too. And I would say it was probably a really lonely experience for her too. And if she'd known that would have been the result, would she still have done it? If she had thought it wasn't an uncommon thing to do, or an unusual thing to do. Maybe she thought she was just getting the ball rolling at this particular party, and everybody else would invariably follow suit. But they didn't, I think I was actually at that party. I didn't see it myself because I left a bit earlier. Kind of glad I did though. It wasn't a nice party. It was a predatory party. Let's just say that it wasn't great. Good time to leave. So the consistent thing that I noticed both with Melody and Sally was that they were unaware that their behavior was abnormal, or that people would have judged them for it, or it would have been seen as bad or sinful at the time in our very Christian society. For their ages, a lot of what they were doing, is kind of very adult stuff. And even for some adults, more what you'd see in kind of corn movies, if you know what I'm saying. They were unaware, ostensibly, that their actions were not fitting And another thing was, like girls, not teenage boys, but teenage girls, getting into their tweens and coming towards puberty or adolescence, they're shy. Girls, regular, normal, like well-raised kids, girls, are shy coming into their teens. They're shy and self-conscious about their bodies. They're shy and self-conscious about the changes that are going on. They're not yet comfortable with what's happening with them. And it's almost like you had an identity for yourself as a kid, the way you looked, what you were good at, the things you were enthusiastic about. But then once you become a teenager, it's kind of like you're a caterpillar in a chrysalis. You're a changing specimen. Your ultimate form hasn't settled yet. Your ultimate shape, form, the way you are in the world hasn't crystallized or solidified into one thing yet. So you're kind of all over the show. There's growth, there's acne, there's growth spurts. Girls, there's also puppy fat as well. Girls are not, on the whole, at their most confident at that stage. In fact, and I'm gonna like put this out there, like at our school at the moment, PE and swimming classes are the kinds of classes that girls of that age just skip altogether. And it's not necessarily because of the physical activity, it's more to do with the changing rooms. They do not want to get undressed in front of others. They don't want others to have to see them and make little judgments, or maybe they don't say anything to their faces, but they talk about them behind their backs. It is that sensitive. It's a very, very sensitive, volatile, precarious time for them, right? The slightest little look, the side glance or inflection of voice or tone of voice about some particular thing, it might not even come down to body parts. It might come down to, oh, you're wearing that, that kind of underwear. Oh my God. Or you're, anything. Oh, I didn't know your mom let you la 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 la. Oh, I didn't know that your family were okay with you wearing na na na. The list goes on. And so girls of that age are extremely self-conscious and shy, and it just didn't add up to me how Sally in particular was so laissez-faire about things. She was very cool and chill, but she was worldly in a way that was far beyond her years and far beyond what she on her own would naturally have progressed to. She had been led there. Somebody had pushed her along or pulled her along. I also remember that Sally had an older sister who had boyfriends and things, and people used to say, oh no, it's the older sister influence. Automatically the older sister influence was a bad influence on her. But the thing is, I'm an older sister, and I didn't do things like that, and I didn't influence my younger siblings in that regard either. So that argument is redundant. It is the opposite of wholesome for that to be happening to a kid. It's absolutely not normal. No adult should be helping themselves to a child's body in any way, sexually, erotically, anything like that. Children are only children for a short time of their lives and then it's over. They are entitled to their own body's sovereignty. Just because they're a child does not mean that they're like moving parts to be used by another person. Or they just haven't come into being, or they just haven't matured into a human yet. You know, they've always been human since the get-go, since little baby. I wonder at people's thought processes sometimes, you know? So yes, if you're a Melody, or if you're a Sally, or even if you're a boy and this kind of thing is happening to you, it's not okay. It's not okay, it's not normal, it's not your fault. And keep feelers out. Keep a feeling out for who you can talk to and who you can tell about this. Back in the day, maybe 20 years ago or more, especially in the 80s and 90s, if people spoke about this, if kids spoke about this, sometimes they weren't listened to, sometimes they weren't heard. They were just kind of like sidelined, or people just thought they had an overactive imagination, or you've got hold of the corn tapes, right? But nowadays, I would say, especially since the Me Too movement and a bunch of other stories, I mean, it's very common knowledge that bad things happen to kids. There's child trafficking, there's all kinds of horrible things going on with kids. People are way more open to hearing you out now than they would have been before. Because now it's, you know, it's a common thread. And there'll be a lot of people who sympathize with you, and a lot of people who will be very happy to help you, want to give you a leg up. And so know that you're not stuck. There are through ways through this, there are through paths through this. Just keep your eyes open and trust your instinct or your gut, and find those who can help you, or find the doorways out, if you know what I'm saying. So I could not be sure whether this is a greater system, you know, an overarching system that plants, let's just say, honeypot conditioned girls into certain areas of society to influence, or shall we say degrade what's going on there. It's a very likely possibility, as we all know these days. What appears on the surface is not necessarily what's really going on. And as also we're becoming increasingly aware how there are larger bodies in our society we may or may not be aware of that have long fingers and a lot of pies, you know, got a lot of reach, so to speak. And so, like moving chess pieces around on a chessboard, they're able to move things to their best advantage for their goals. This is all just theory. It's just theory. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.